The scream didn't sound human. It sounded primal, a jagged tear in the velvet silence of the ancient forest. It was the sound of a mind trying to process something that shouldn't exist. It was late October, just as the twilight bleeds in a true night in Northern California. A group of 3 hikers, experienced trekkers who knew the trails of the Redwood National and State Parks, had ventured off the beaten path. They were looking for a spot to camp, somewhere away from the regulated sites, somewhere quiet. They found quiet, but they didn't find peace. One of the hikers, a man named Greg, had shined his high-powered tactical flashlight into the hollow of a massive, ancient tree. It was a goose-pin redwood, one of those titans hollowed out by centuries of fire and rot, yet still standing, a living chimney of bark and wood. But when the beam of light cut through the darkness of the hollow, it didn't reveal charred wood or spiderwebs. It revealed a color that had no business being in the deep greens and browns of the forest. It was a pulsing, fleshy pink. Inside that tree, growing silently for years, was a fungus scientists had never seen before. It clung to the interior walls of the hollow in thick, veinous sheets, cascading down like melted wax. It smelled sweet, cloying, like rotting fruit and wet copper. Greg stumbled back, dropping his light. His friends rushed over, thinking he'd seen a bear. When they retrieved the light and forced themselves to look again, they realized the texture of the growth wasn't uniform. The fungal mass was undulating, wrapping around distinct shapes. Investigators would later arrive in hazmat suits, treating the base of that tree like a biological ground zero. When they carefully scraped samples from the trunk, peeling back layers of the aggressive, unknown mycelium, they didn't just find plant matter. They found calcium. They found enamel. They found human DNA. But who did this biological nightmare belong to? And why did an entire family, a young father, his wife, and their 1-year-old baby girl, vanish without leaving a single trace 4 years prior? This is one of the most disturbing disappearance cases ever recorded in Northern California. For years, the vanished Harrison family was a ghost story, a cautionary tale told to tourists who strayed too far from the path. But what hikers found 4 years later has left detectives questioning everything they thought they knew about the Redwoods. Because the fungus wasn't just growing on the tree, it was growing from something inside it. And to understand how a family ends up becoming part of the forest floor, we have to go back to the beginning. To a sunny Tuesday, when a car packed with camping gear drove north, carrying 3 people who had no idea that they were driving straight into a trap set years in advance. To understand the tragedy, you have to understand the loss. Daniel and Emily Harrison were not reckless people. They weren't thrill seekers looking to challenge nature. They were the kind of neighbors you trusted with your spare key. Daniel, 28 years old, was a mechanic in a small town just south of the Oregon border. He was the guy who would fix a stranger's flat tire in the rain and refuse payment. He had grease permanently stained into his cuticles and a gentle, quiet demeanor that made him a favorite among the locals. He loved the outdoors, but he respected it. He knew the difference between a walk in the park and the deep woods. Emily was 26, a nursing student who was arguably the backbone of their small family. She was warm, meticulously organized, and deeply protective of their daughter, Lily. But the last year had been hard. Since Lily's birth, Emily had been fighting a silent war with postpartum depression. It wasn't the kind that made the headlines. It was the quiet, eroding kind. The kind that made getting out of bed feel like climbing a mountain. They were struggling financially, as many young families do. Daniel was picking up extra shifts, and Emily was trying to study while caring for a 1-year-old. The stress was a low-level hum in their house, a vibration that never quite stopped. They needed a break. They couldn't afford a flight to Hawaii or a resort stay. But they had the Redwoods. They had the most majestic cathedral on earth right in their backyard. Daniel proposed a trip as a way to hit reset. Just us, he had told her. No cell service, no bills, just fresh air. It'll be good for you. It'll be good for us. They planned everything. Emily packed enough formula and diapers for a week, even though they were only staying for 3 nights. Daniel checked the car, checked the tent, checked the weather. They were going to a semi-remote site, accessible by car, but far enough from the main road to feel isolated. It was supposed to be the weekend that saved them. It was supposed to be the memory they looked back on when Lily was older. But neither of them knew that someone had been watching them long before they stepped into the trees. In the weeks leading up to the trip, Daniel had mentioned something strange to his brother on the phone. He said he felt like he was seeing the same truck parked down the street from his shop, day after day. A rusted green pickup with a camper shell. He never saw the driver, just a silhouette. He brushed it off as paranoia, a symptom of being overtired. It's probably just a new customer, he'd said. But little did he know, his nightmare was just beginning. That truck wasn't a customer, and the eyes watching him weren't looking for a mechanic. They were looking for subjects. On their second night in the Redwoods, everything changed. The reset button they wanted to hit would indeed be pressed, but it would stop their world entirely. The drive into the park was breathtaking. The deeper you go into the Redwoods, the more the light changes. It shifts from the bright, harsh yellow of the sun to a filtered, ethereal green. The air grows cooler, heavier with the scent of damp earth and pine needles that have been decomposing for 1,000 years. When the Harrisons arrived at their campsite, it was late afternoon. The site was perfect. It was nestled in a small clearing, surrounded by trees that were wider than their car. It was quiet. Too quiet, perhaps, but to city ears, the silence feels like luxury. They set up the tent. Daniel built a fire ring. Emily laid out a blanket for Lily to crawl on. It was idyllic. A ranger stopped by on patrol, a standard check-in. Stay close to the main trails. The ranger had warned them, tipping his hat. The canopy plays tricks on your GPS. People get lost out here more than you'd think. And once you're off the path, every tree looks the same. Daniel thanked him, promising they were sticking to the site. The ranger drove off, his taillights fading into the dusk. That first night was peaceful. They roasted marshmallows. They laughed. For the first time in months, Emily's shoulders relaxed. The weight seemed to lift. But the next day, the atmosphere shifted. It started with small things. Red flags that seem insignificant in isolation, but form a terrifying pattern in hindsight. Mid-morning, Daniel went to get water from the communal pump a half-mile down the fire road. When he came back, he looked uneasy. He told Emily he had seen a vehicle parked deep in the brush, far from any designated spot. It was a green truck with a camper shell, the same one he thought he'd seen at his shop. Maybe they're poaching, Daniel whispered, not wanting to scare her. Or just illegal camping. Emily tried to brush it off. It's a popular truck, Dan. Don't let it ruin the trip. But as the sun began to dip below the tree line on that second day, the forest felt different. The birds stopped singing earlier than usual. The wind died down, leaving a heavy, suffocating stillness. Around 8 p.m., after they had put Lily down to sleep in the tent, Emily grabbed Daniel's arm. "Did you hear that?" she hissed. "Hear what?" "Rustling. Right behind the tent." Daniel grabbed his flashlight and circled the campsite. The beam cut through the ferns and the massive trunks. Nothing. Just the shadows stretching long and thin like fingers. "It's just a raccoon, Em. Or a deer," he assured her, though his grip on the flashlight was tight. At 9:14 p.m., Emily sent a text message to her sister. It was the last communication anyone would ever receive from her. Due to the spotty signal, it didn't send immediately, but the timestamp was logged in her phone's outbox. The text read, "Something feels off here. Can't explain it. It's too dark. I feel like we're on a stage and someone is in the audience. We're packing up first thing in the morning." They made the decision to leave a day early. They listened to their instincts. But in the wilderness, sometimes instinct isn't enough when you're up against a predator who knows the terrain better than you know your own home. They zipped up the tent. They huddled together. They waited for morning. The next morning, the sun rose, filtering through the mist. Their car was still there, covered in a light layer of dew. The fire pit was cold ash. But the Harrisons were gone. The discovery was made by the same ranger who had warned them 2 days prior. He was doing his rounds, checking permits. When he pulled up to the Harrison site at 11 a.m., he expected to see them packing up or already gone. Instead, he found a ghost ship on land. The car was locked. The keys were not in the ignition. The tent was unzipped, the flap flapping lazily in the morning breeze. The ranger, a man named Thomas with 20 years of experience, felt the hairs on the back of his neck stand up. He called out, "Hello? Anyone home?" Silence. He approached the tent. Inside, it was chaos. Sleeping bags were twisted, not rolled. A baby bottle lay on its side. A pool of spoiled milk soaked into the nylon floor. A diaper bag was overturned, contents spilled. But there was no blood. No signs of a violent struggle. No slashed fabric. No drag marks in the dirt outside. It looked like they had simply evaporated. Thomas radioed it in immediately. Code 1078. Possible missing persons. Family of 3. Send backup. Within hours, the peaceful campsite became a crime scene. The search operation was massive. Drones with thermal imaging cameras buzzed over the canopy. Search and rescue teams with cadaver dogs combed the underbrush. Hundreds of volunteers lined up, walking arm in arm through the dense ferns. But the redwoods are unforgiving. The trees are so large they block satellite signals. The terrain is a labyrinth of ravines and ridges. The dogs were the most confusing part. 3 separate canine units were brought in. All 3 dogs picked up a scent at the tent: Daniel's, Emily's, and the baby's. They followed it for about 50 yards toward the dense tree line, and then, simultaneously, they stopped. They whined and circled, confused. The scent didn't fade. It vanished. It was as if the family had been plucked into the sky. Theories ran wild. First, the authorities suspected an animal attack. A mountain lion or a bear. But bears leave messes. They drag. They tear. There was no blood, no shredded clothing. Then, the whispers started. Did Daniel snap? The financial pressure. The new baby. Did he kill his family and flee? Police dug into his life. They interviewed his boss, his friends, his bank. They found nothing but a man who loved his wife and child. There was no life insurance policy, no secret affair, no history of violence. Days turned into weeks. The search radius expanded to 5 miles, then 10. Then, a disturbing piece of evidence was found. A volunteer, hacking through thick brush 1.7 miles off the main trail, terrain so rough that carrying a baby would have been nearly impossible, found something sitting on a redwood stump. It was a baby's shoe, one of Lily's tiny pink sneakers. It wasn't dropped. It wasn't muddy. It was placed neatly, perfectly centered on the stump, facing back toward the campsite. It was a message. Someone wanted them to know that this wasn't an accident. This wasn't a family getting lost. The police captain held a press conference, his face grim. "We are no longer looking for a lost family," he said. "We are looking for a perpetrator." But the forest kept its secrets. The rain came, washing away footprints. The leaves fell, covering potential clues. The media circus packed up and moved to the next tragedy. The Harrisons had become a statistic. Another poster on the bulletin board at the ranger station. But a far more chilling clue would be found by a botanist days later. Something alive. Something that shouldn't have been there. While the police were looking for bodies, Dr. Eris Thorne was looking at moss. Dr. Thorne was a local botanist, not involved in the criminal investigation. He was conducting a survey of fungal biodiversity in the park. About a week after the disappearance, while collecting samples near the search grid, he noticed something strange on a fallen log. It was a patch of fungus. At first glance, it looked like a common slime mold. But under his field loupe, it was wrong. The structure was aggressive. It was reaching out with tendrils that looked less like plant matter and more like nerves. He noted it in his logbook, specimen 89. Unknown taxonomy. Exhibits phototropism, but also thermotropism. Seems to be growing toward heat sources. He didn't connect it to the Harrisons. Why would he? It was just a patch of mold in a billion-acre forest. But looking back, that patch was the first breadcrumb. Meanwhile, the detective leading the case, Detective Miller, was hitting walls. But he did have one strange witness account that kept him up at night. A solo hiker, a woman who had been camping illegal miles away, came forward 3 weeks later. She claimed that on the morning of the disappearance, just before dawn, she saw a man walking through the woods. He wasn't hiking. she told Miller. He was marching. He had a heavy pack, and he was carrying something in his arms wrapped in a dark blanket. It looked heavy, but he moved like it was nothing. Did you see his face? Miller asked. No, he had a hood up, but I saw his boots. They were odd. They had these straps on them, like climbing spikes. Climbing spikes. Tree climbers used them to scale the massive redwoods for seed harvesting or research. Miller went back to Daniel's brother. He asked about the stalking again. The truck, the brother said, his voice trembling. Daniel said it had a camper shell, and he said the back window had a sticker, a university sticker, maybe Oregon State or Humboldt. Miller checked the records. Thousands of trucks matched that description. They interviewed professors, students, researchers. Nothing stuck. The case began to freeze. The winter rains came and turned the forest into a mudslide. The search was officially suspended. The Harrisons were gone. The town of Crescent City mourned. A memorial service was held without bodies. But nature doesn't stop. In the deep woods, inside a hollow tree that no one had checked because the opening was 20 feet off the ground, something was happening. The fungus that Dr. Thorne had seen on the log was just a spore that had drifted. The main colony was feeding. It was growing. It was incubating. And for 4 years, the forest grew around the secret. The seasons changed. Tourists came and went, taking selfies in front of trees that held horrific secrets in their bellies. Just when everyone thought the story was over, just when the file was gathering dust in the basement of the police station, a group of hikers decided to explore a ridge that wasn't on the map. Every lead went cold, until 4 years later. We returned to that night, in October. The scream, the flashlight beam. When the biological hazard team arrived, the scene was surreal. The forest was lit up by floodlights, casting long, dancing shadows against the canopy. The tree in question was a monster, easily 15 feet in diameter. The hollow, the goose pen, was accessed through a fissure in the bark about head height. The first responder, a hazmat specialist named Sarah, climbed a ladder to look inside. The sound was what hit her first. A faint, wet popping sound. It was the fungus releasing spores. The interior of the tree was coated in the biomass. It was pulsating, reacting to the heat of the floodlights. It had a pinkish-gray hue, veined with dark red. It looked like the inside of a lung. "I'm going in for a sample," Sarah said over the radio, her voice muffled by the respirator. She used a specialized scraping tool. As she pulled away a thick, rubbery sheet of the fungus, she froze. Embedded in the fungal mat, fused to the wood of the tree, was a piece of fabric. It was blue denim, and inside the denim was bone. "Command," she choked out. "We have remains. They're part of the tree." The extraction took 3 days. It was less like an excavation and more like a surgery. The fungus had acted as a preservative and a binder. It had wrapped around the bodies, mummifying them in a way, but also consuming them. There were 3 distinct clusters. 2 adults, 1 very small child. They were found deep in the hollow, in a root pocket where the tree widened at the base. They hadn't fallen in. The opening was too high up, and the cavity too deep. They had been placed there. When the DNA results came back, the lab technician ran them 3 times just to be sure. The markers were a 99.9% match. Daniel Harrison, Emily Harrison, Lily Harrison. The family hadn't left the park. They hadn't been kidnapped to Mexico or murdered in a motel. They had been within 3 miles of their campsite the entire time. But the condition of the bodies revealed a nightmare that pure forensics couldn't explain. The fungus wasn't just growing on them. It had grown through them. The mycelium, the root structure of the fungus, had replaced their marrow. It had woven through their rib cages. And most terrifying of all, the position of the bodies. Daniel was at the bottom. Emily was curled on top of him. And Lily was tucked into the space between them, shielded. Even in death, they were trying to protect her. But the real horror? They didn't climb inside the tree to hide. The entry point was 20 feet up, a different hole than the fissure the hikers found. Someone had hoisted them up 20 feet into the air and dropped them into the hollow trunk like coins into a piggy bank. The discovery reignited the investigation with the force of a bomb. Detective Miller, now 4 years older and grayer, came back to the scene. He looked at the tree, then at the climbing spikes marks on the bark. "He came back," Miller whispered. "The forensic analysis of the bodies provided the timeline. They had been killed quickly. The cause of death for Daniel was blunt force trauma to the back of the head. Instant. Emily and Lily had been suffocation victims, likely rendered unconscious by a chemical agent first. This was a mercy, in a twisted way. They weren't alive when the fungus took hold. But the fungus itself became the star witness. Dr. Aristhorne, the botanist who had found the strange sample years ago, was brought in as a consultant. When he saw the growth inside the tree, he turned pale. "This isn't natural," he said. "This is Ophiocordyceps. But modified. Cordyceps is a real fungus. It creates zombie ants, taking over the host body to spread spores. But it doesn't infect humans. Our body temperature is too high. This strain," Thorne explained to the detectives, "has been bred. It's been acclimatized to mammalian biology. It thrives on calcium and protein. Someone didn't just find this. Someone made this. This changed the profile of the killer entirely. They weren't looking for a drifter or a random psychopath. They were looking for a scientist. Someone with advanced knowledge of mycology and the patience to breed a biological weapon. The killer's signature was the placement. The hollow tree was a terrarium. He was running an experiment. The Harrison family were not just victims. They were cultured dishes. Miller went back to the files. He looked for anyone with a background in biology, botany, or forestry who had been in the area. That's when he found a clue that had been overlooked for years. In the initial sweep of suspicious vehicles, a retired park ranger had noted a truck parked near a trailhead weeks before the disappearance. He hadn't logged it as suspicious at the time because it had a university parking permit. The permit number was partially visible in the ranger's dashcam footage, which had been archived. Miller enhanced the image. It was a permit for the University of Oregon Department of Mycology. He ran the permit. It belonged to a faculty vehicle that had been reported stolen 5 years ago. But the man who reported it stolen was a professor named Dr. Elias Vane. Miller dug into Vane. Vane wasn't just a professor. He was a brilliant, obsessive researcher who had been fired and stripped of his tenure. Why? Because of unethical experimentation regarding fungal adaptation in vertebrate subjects. He had been caught injecting lab rats with experimental spores to see if he could create a sustainable ecosystem within a living host. When he was fired, he disappeared. He fell off the grid. But investigators overlooked one clue for years, until a retired ranger flipped everything upside down. Dr. Elias Vane didn't just disappear. He moved to the only place where he could continue his work undisturbed, the Redwoods. Miller pulled Vane's old academic papers. They were rambling, manic manifestos about the purity of the cycle. Vane believed that humans had removed themselves from the food chain, that we were wasted biological potential because we bury our dead in concrete and coffins. He wanted to return humans to the earth in the most literal, violent way possible. The Redwoods are the perfect host. One journal entry read, "They live for 2,000 years. If I can fuse the human life cycle with a tree, I can create immortality." The manhunt began. They knew he was likely still in the woods, or close to them. You don't tend a garden and then leave it. They found him not by satellite, but by following the pattern of the forest. They looked for other trees that showed signs of the pink rot. They found 3 more trees in a 5-mile radius with early stages of the growth. No bodies, just animal carcasses. Deer, raccoons. He was practicing. Finally, they triangulated a location. A dilapidated, abandoned logger's cabin deep in the 6 Rivers National Forest, bordering the park. The SWAT team moved in at dawn. The cabin was a house of horrors. It wasn't a home, it was a lab. Petri dishes lined the shelves. Vials of spores were labeled with dates and temperatures. On the wall, pinned up with surgical precision, were photos. Photos of the Harrison family. Photos of them at the gas station. Photos of them setting up the tent. And a journal, open on the desk. The entry from 4 years ago read, Three subjects enter my sanctuary. The male is strong, good substrate for the root structure. The female is high in lipids. The infant is pure potential. Rapid cell growth. They will feed the cycle. They will become the tree. Dr. Elias Vane was not in the cabin. He was in the root cellar beneath it. When the SWAT team kicked the door down, they found him. He wasn't armed with a gun. He was holding a glass vial of the spores, threatening to drop it. "Don't come closer," he screamed, his eyes wild, his skin pale and blotchy. He had been infecting himself, slowly, trying to become part of his own experiment. "You cannot stop the bloom." Miller didn't hesitate. He deployed a taser. Vane convulsed and dropped the vial. It shattered, but the team was in full hazmat gear. They dragged him out, screaming about the beautiful synthesis. Vane was arrested and charged with 3 counts of first-degree murder. The evidence was overwhelming. The climbing spikes found in his cabin matched the marks on the tree. The DNA in the fungus matched the family. But even after his arrest, investigators uncovered one final, heartbreaking truth. During the interrogation, Vane was arrogant. He bragged about his success. But he revealed something that broke Detective Miller's heart. The father, Vane sneered. He fought. He fought harder than the bear. Forensic reconstruction of the events showed that Daniel hadn't been taken by surprise in his sleep, as they initially thought. When Vane attacked the tent, Daniel woke up. He realized what was happening. He physically tackled Vane, taking the blows, buying time. He yelled at Emily to run. Vane admitted that he had to chase Emily. She had made it almost 100 yards into the dark woods, clutching Lily. She had hidden the baby in a hollow log and tried to lead Vane away. Vane caught Emily first. Then he went back and found Lily. They didn't just vanish. They fought. They struggled. They acted with the supreme love of parents until their very last breath. Daniel stalled the monster. Emily hid the future. The tragedy is that Vane knew the woods better. Dr. Elias Vane is currently serving 3 consecutive life sentences in a maximum security prison in Oregon. He is kept in solitary confinement, not for his protection, but because he attempts to collect mold from the corners of his cell to start again. The Harrison tree, as it became known, was sealed. The Park Service debated cutting it down, but decided to leave it as a natural tomb. They sealed the hollow with concrete to prevent anyone from disturbing the resting place, and to contain the fungus. A year after the discovery, a memorial bench was placed on the trail, overlooking the valley where the Harrisons had camped. The plaque reads, "For Daniel, Emily, and Lily, who love the woods, and whom the woods will keep forever." The case of the Redwoods fungus remains a dark stain on the history of the park. It serves as a grim reminder that while nature is indifferent, humans can be malevolent. The wilderness holds beauty, silence, and peace. But it also provides cover for the unimaginable darkness that can exist in the human mind. When you walk through the redwoods, and you look up at those giants that have stood for 1,000 years, remember that they see everything. They keep every secret. And sometimes, if you listen closely to the hollow knocking in the wood, they might be trying to tell you something. So, I have to ask, knowing what you know now, knowing that someone could be watching from the tree line with a plan you can't even conceive, would you still venture off the trail? What would you have done if you saw that green truck? If this story shocked you, if it made you look at the trees a little differently, hit the like button, share this with your hiking partner, and subscribe for more real-life mysteries that prove the scariest monsters aren't ghosts. They're us.